The easiest way to make a powerful man remember you is to tell him no. I did not know that the day Ethan Moretti walked into my bookstore. If I had, maybe I would have been more careful. Or maybe not. The truth is, I had spent most of my life around ordinary people. Teachers, students, parents buying gifts for their children, retirees looking for mystery novels. My world smelled like old paper, fresh coffee, and rainy afternoons. Ethan Moretti belonged to a different universe entirely. Everybody in Boston seemed to know his name. Some people admired him. Others feared him. Most avoided talking about him altogether. I had never met him. At least not until a cold Thursday afternoon in October. The bookstore was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the front windows while jazz music played through old speakers hidden between shelves. I stood behind the counter organizing a stack of newly arrived novels when the front door opened. The little bell above it chimed once. I glanced up automatically, then immediately looked back down. A customer was a customer. Nothing unusual about that. "Excuse me." The voice was calm, deep, confident. I looked up again. The man standing in front of me was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people pay attention without understanding why. Dark hair, sharp features, expensive coat, the kind of face that probably appeared on magazine covers and business reports. "Can I help you?" I asked. His eyes moved briefly around the store. "I would like to purchase the building." I blinked. The building? Yes. I waited for a smile that never came. "This bookstore is located between two properties I already own." He spoke as though discussing the weather. "Acquiring it would simplify several development plans." I stared at him for a second, then laughed softly. "You are serious?" "I am." "That is unfortunate." For the first time, a hint of surprise appeared on his face. "Why?" "Because I am not selling." The silence that followed felt oddly dramatic. Ethan studied me carefully. Most people probably changed their minds when he entered a room. I returned to organizing books. "Name your price," he said. "No, you have not heard the number." "I do not need to." The surprise in his expression deepened. "Everyone has a number." "Maybe." I placed another book onto the shelf. "I still do not want to sell." Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, the bookstore felt suddenly very quiet. "You realize what I am offering?" he asked. "Yes." "And your answer is still no?" "Absolutely." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan smiled. Not a large smile, just enough to suggest he was amused. "Interesting. People keep telling me that." "Do they?" "Usually right before they stop asking questions." A short laugh escaped him. Genuine. Unplanned. Somehow that felt more surprising than anything else. He glanced around the bookstore again. The reading corner near the back. The children's section. The handwritten recommendations attached to shelves. "You built this yourself?" he asked. "With a lot of help from coffee and poor financial decisions." Another small smile appeared. Honest answer. Occupational habit. For reasons I could not explain, the conversation no longer felt uncomfortable. Strange, yes, but not uncomfortable. Ethan walked toward a nearby shelf and picked up a novel. What if I asked again next month? Still no. Next year? Probably no. 5 years. I laughed. "You are persistent." He looked directly at me. "So are you." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten unexpectedly. Not from fear. From awareness. The kind that appears when someone notices more than they should. A few minutes later, he purchased the novel, thanked me, and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "Claire." I frowned. "I never told you my name." His expression remained perfectly calm. "No, you did not." Then he walked into the rain and disappeared. I stood frozen behind the counter watching the door close. At the time, I thought the strange part of the day was over. I had no idea it had only just begun. Some people enter your life through the front door. Others slowly occupy your thoughts without permission. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan Moretti became an unexpected problem. Not because he threatened me. Not because he pressured me to sell the bookstore. The problem was much simpler. He kept showing up. The first time after our strange meeting, I assumed it was a coincidence. The second time, I became suspicious. By the 5th visit, even my part-time employee had started noticing. "Your rich friend is back," Lily whispered one Tuesday afternoon while rearranging a display near the register. "He is not my friend." "Then why does he keep buying books he clearly does not have time to read?" I glanced toward the history section. Ethan stood there studying a shelf with the concentration of someone reviewing legal documents. The expensive coat was different. The watch was different. The expression was exactly the same. Calm, focused, slightly amused by the world around him. Maybe he likes books, I said. Lily looked at me as though I had suggested the moon was made of pizza. That man does not read for fun. Unfortunately, I was starting to suspect she might be right. Ethan never rushed. He would spend 20 minutes walking through the store, ask 1 or 2 questions about a novel, purchase something, leave, then somehow appear again a few days later. The strange part was that he never mentioned buying the building again. Not once. It was almost as though the original reason for visiting had disappeared. One rainy afternoon, I finally decided to ask. Ethan was sitting in the reading corner near the back window with a hardcover novel resting unopened on his lap. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas while drops of rain slid down the glass. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He looked up immediately. "Of course. Are you actually reading any of these books?" A smile appeared. "Some of them." That was not a convincing answer. It was an honest one. I folded my arms. "Then why do you keep coming here?" His expression remained perfectly neutral. "Perhaps I enjoy the atmosphere." "You own half the city." "Not half. You know what I mean." His smile widened slightly. "The atmosphere here is better." I should have laughed. Instead, I found myself staring at him. Because for a second, he seemed completely sincere. That was becoming another problem. Every newspaper article described Ethan Moretti as powerful, influential, untouchable. Yet the man sitting in front of me seemed surprisingly normal. Dangerous in a different way. Easier to like. "You are staring," he said. Heat immediately rushed into my face. "You are impossible." I have been told that before. The conversation drifted naturally after that. Books, travel, favorite authors, childhood memories. Somehow an hour passed without either of us noticing. For the first time, I forgot who he was supposed to be. Then the front door opened. The atmosphere inside the bookstore shifted instantly. 3 men entered wearing expensive suits. One approached Ethan while the other 2 remained near the entrance. "Mr. Moretti," the man said quietly. "The meeting starts in 40 minutes. Ethan glanced at his watch. "Already. Several people are waiting." The man finally noticed me. His expression changed immediately. Curious, respectful, surprised. Ethan stood and closed the book. "Duty calls. Sounds important." Unfortunately, I walked him toward the register. As he reached for his wallet, I noticed something. The novel he had been carrying was one I personally recommended during his second visit. The receipt still marked the page where he had stopped reading. He had actually read it. "You finished it," I said. Ethan followed my gaze, then smiled. "I told you some of them." Before I could answer, his phone vibrated. The screen lit briefly. Whoever was calling seemed important. He ignored it. "You should get that. It can wait." The simple answer sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. Because people like Ethan Moretti did not usually make powerful people wait. Yet somehow, standing inside a small bookstore on a rainy afternoon, he was doing exactly that. And for reasons I did not fully understand, I was beginning to look forward to his visits too. People reveal who they are when they think nobody is paying attention. That was how I learned Ethan Moretti was far more complicated than the stories people told about him. 3 weeks after our first meeting, his visits had become a normal part of my routine. Not daily, not predictable, just frequent enough that I noticed when several days passed without seeing him. That realization alone should have concerned me. Instead, it made me curious. On a bright Saturday afternoon, the bookstore was busier than usual. Families wandered through the children's section. College students searched for discounted textbooks. A local author signed copies of her latest novel near the front window. The entire store buzzed with quiet energy. I was helping a customer find a historical biography when Lily appeared beside me with an expression that immediately signaled trouble. "Do not look now," she whispered. That sentence has never ended well. "Trust me." I glanced toward the entrance. 2 men had just entered the bookstore. One of them was Ethan. The other was someone I had never seen before. He was slightly younger, equally well dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting attention. Unlike Ethan, however, this man seemed to enjoy being noticed. "Who was that?" I asked. Lily lowered her voice even further. "That is Lucas Bennett." "No relation?" "Not unless your family secretly owns shipping companies." I laughed softly. The name sounded familiar. Boston seemed full of powerful people I knew absolutely nothing about. Ethan noticed me and offered a small nod. The gesture felt strangely personal. Lucas followed his gaze. The second he saw me, something flickered across his face. Interest, curiosity, recognition that I did not entirely understand. "Oh," Lily muttered. "What?" "Nothing." Her grin suggested otherwise. Ethan and Lucas slowly made their way through the store. Unlike Ethan's usual visits, this one felt different. Lucas examined shelves only briefly before his attention shifted elsewhere, mostly toward me. Every time I looked up, I caught him observing the bookstore, or perhaps observing the person who owned it. After several minutes, Ethan approached the counter carrying 2 novels. Lucas followed. "Claire," Ethan said. "This is Lucas Bennett. Nice to meet you." Lucas smiled warmly. "I have heard a surprising amount about you." I looked immediately toward Ethan. His expression remained completely unreadable. "Hopefully good things," I said. "Only good things." Lucas glanced around the bookstore. I expected something larger. That is usually not a compliment. He laughed. "I meant it as one. Places like this are disappearing." The conversation flowed naturally after that. Lucas was charming, intelligent, easy to talk to. If Ethan was controlled silence, Lucas was effortless conversation. Customers seemed drawn to him almost instantly. So did Lily, who abandoned all attempts to hide her fascination. 20 minutes later, I was helping restock a display near the front when I overheard part of a conversation between the 2 men. They stood several feet away near the fiction section. Neither realized I could hear them. "So that is Claire Parker," Lucas said quietly. "Yes." "Interesting." Ethan did not respond. Lucas glanced toward me again. "You were right." "About what?" "She is different." I froze. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough to listen. Lucas smiled slightly. "And she is beautiful." The comment was harmless. Polite even. Yet something unexpected happened. Ethan's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger. Not irritation. Something else. Something tighter. More focused. The shift lasted only a second before disappearing. But Lucas noticed it too. In fact, he seemed amused by it. "What?" Ethan asked. Lucas laughed softly. "Nothing." The answer clearly meant the opposite. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not because of what was said, because of the reaction I had just witnessed. For the first time since meeting Ethan Moretti, I had seen something break through his perfect control. And for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly suspected Lucas Bennett had noticed it too. There are moments that change everything. Most of the time, you do not realize it until much later. The charity gala took place 3 weeks after Lucas Bennett first visited the bookstore. If someone had told me I would spend a Saturday evening surrounded by Boston's most influential people, I would have laughed. Yet there I was, standing beneath crystal chandeliers in a ballroom overlooking the harbor. The entire event felt unreal. Elegant dresses, tailored suits, soft piano music drifting through conversations that probably involved more money than I would earn in several lifetimes. I did not belong there. At least that was how I felt. Apparently, Ethan disagreed. "You look nervous," he said as he approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I am nervous." "Why?" I stared at him. "You cannot seriously be asking that." A faint smile appeared. "Fair point." He handed me one of the glasses. "For what it is worth, everyone else is nervous too." I glanced around the room. "I highly doubt that." "Trust me." His eyes moved briefly across the crowd. "Some of them are terrified." Before I could ask what that meant, another guest approached. Then another. And another. The evening quickly became a blur of introductions. What surprised me most was how people reacted to Ethan. Nobody ignored him. Nobody interrupted him. When he entered a conversation, attention shifted naturally toward him. Not because he demanded it, because it simply happened. Yet despite dozens of people trying to speak with him, Ethan never seemed far away. Every time I looked up, I found him somewhere nearby. Watching, listening, making sure I was comfortable. The realization should have flattered me. Instead, it made me wonder why. Around 9 o'clock, I stepped onto an outdoor terrace overlooking the water. Cool ocean air felt refreshing after hours inside the crowded ballroom. City lights reflected across the harbor. For the first time all evening, I was alone. Or so I thought. Escaping already? I turned. Lucas Bennett leaned casually against the railing, taking a break. Understandable. He smiled. These events are exhausting. I laughed softly. That is the first honest thing anyone has said tonight. Then I should probably stop before someone hears me. The conversation felt easy, comfortable, much like our first meeting. Lucas had a talent for making people feel relaxed. We talked about books, travel, and the absurdity of formal events. For several minutes, I forgot we were surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the city. Then another voice joined the conversation. "There you are, Ethan." I looked up immediately. Something about his expression seemed different. Controlled, calm, yet somehow sharper than usual. Lucas noticed it too. In fact, the corner of his mouth twitched as though he were trying not to smile. "We were just discussing literature," Lucas said. "A dangerous topic." Ethan stepped beside me, close enough that I became strangely aware of his presence. I am sure. The three of us stood together overlooking the harbor. For a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. Then Lucas glanced toward me and laughed softly. "You know," he said, "Claire is probably the most beautiful person in this room." My face immediately warmed. "Lucas, what?" He looked entirely unapologetic. "It is true." Before I could respond, Lucas turned toward Ethan. The amusement in his eyes became unmistakable. "Seriously though," he said casually, "she is gorgeous." What happened next took less than a second. Ethan did not hesitate. He did not think. He did not even look surprised by his own words. "She is mine." Silence. Complete silence. The harbor. The city lights. The distant music from inside the ballroom. Everything seemed to stop at once. My heart nearly forgot how to beat. Lucas stared at Ethan, then at me, then back at Ethan. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. Not because he was shocked, because he clearly understood something before anyone else did, including Ethan himself. And judging by the expression that appeared on Ethan's face a second later, he had only just realized what he had said. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt like an hour. I stood frozen beneath the soft lights of the harbor terrace while my heart tried to understand what had just happened. Lucas Bennett looked delighted. Ethan Moretti looked as though he wished time would reverse itself. And I was caught somewhere in the middle. For the first time since meeting him, Ethan seemed genuinely unsettled. "Well," Lucas said finally, breaking the silence. That was informative. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. "Lucas, what?" His grin widened. "You said it. Not me." I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it again. Because honestly, I had no idea what to say. Ethan looked toward me. For a moment, something vulnerable appeared behind his usual composure. "Claire." "Yes." He seemed ready to explain, then apparently changed his mind. "Nothing." Lucas laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Conversations continued. Music played. Guests mingled. Yet everything felt different now. Every time I glanced toward Ethan, I found him unusually quiet, distracted, thoughtful. The confidence that normally surrounded him seemed slightly off balance. By midnight, the event finally ended. Guests began leaving. Valets brought cars to the front entrance. The harbor reflected thousands of city lights beneath the dark sky. Ethan offered to drive me home. Normally, I might have declined. Tonight, curiosity won. The ride began in complete silence. Not awkward silence. Careful silence. The kind that exists when both people are thinking about the same thing. Boston drifted past the windows. Streetlights painted golden reflections across the dashboard. Finally, I looked toward him. "So," Ethan sighed. "So, are you going to pretend that never happened?" His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I considered it. And it would not work. Despite everything, I smiled. Probably not. Another stretch of silence followed. Then Ethan surprised me. I do not know why I said it. The honesty caught me completely off guard. "You do not." No, he shook his head slowly. 1 second Lucas was talking. The next second the words were already out. I studied his profile beneath the passing streetlights. For a man known for control, losing it seemed deeply unsettling. That must be frustrating. A short laugh escaped him. "You have no idea." We stopped at a red light. Ethan stared through the windshield. "I have spent most of my life thinking before I speak." That sounds exhausting. It is. For the first time all evening, he smiled. A real smile. Brief, but genuine. Then the traffic light changed. The conversation drifted elsewhere after that. Books. The fundraiser. Lucas and his inability to take anything seriously. Yet underneath, every topic lingered the same unanswered question. Why had Ethan said it? More importantly, why had hearing it affected me so much? When we reached my apartment building, Neither of us moved immediately. The engine remained running. Soft music played through the speakers. Outside, the street stood quiet beneath midnight skies. Claire. I looked up. Ethan seemed unusually serious again. I am sorry if that made you uncomfortable. The apology surprised me. It did not. His eyes met mine. It did not. I shook my head. It confused me. A faint smile appeared. That makes two of us. We sat there for another moment. Then I opened the door. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Claire. I climbed the steps toward my apartment. Halfway up, I glanced back. His car remained parked beside the curb. He was still sitting there, thinking, watching the building, looking more troubled than I had ever seen him. The next morning, I assumed things would return to normal. They did not, because sometime between leaving the fundraiser and watching my apartment lights turn off, Ethan Moretti had started asking himself a question he could no longer avoid. And from everything I would learn later, the answer terrified him far more than any rival ever had. Some truths become impossible to ignore once they enter your mind. For Ethan Moretti, that truth arrived the morning after the fundraiser. I did not know it yet. All I knew was that something had changed. The following week felt different. Not dramatic, not obvious, just different enough that I noticed. Ethan still visited the bookstore. We still talked about books and life and whatever happened to cross our minds. Yet there was a new awareness between us. Every glance lasted slightly longer. Every silence seemed to contain words neither of us was ready to say. And perhaps the strangest part was that Lucas Bennett noticed all of it. On Thursday afternoon, I was arranging a new display near the front window when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up expecting Ethan. Instead, Lucas walked in alone. Please tell me you are not here to buy the building too, I said. He laughed immediately. No, I came for a book. That sounds suspicious. Everything sounds suspicious when you know Ethan. I could not argue with that. Lucas wandered through the store while chatting casually. Unlike Ethan, he never stayed in one place for long. He picked up novels, read random pages, then abandoned them on nearby tables. You drive librarians crazy, do you know that? I asked. Probably. His grin widened. It builds character. 20 minutes later, we sat in the reading corner drinking coffee. Outside, autumn leaves drifted along the sidewalk beneath bright afternoon sunlight. The atmosphere felt relaxed, comfortable. Then Lucas surprised me. He likes you. I nearly spilled my coffee. Excuse me, Ethan. My heart immediately betrayed me by beating faster. You are imagining things. I am not. You absolutely are. Lucas looked genuinely amused. Claire, I have known that man for almost 15 years. And I have never seen him lose an argument with himself before. I blinked. What does that even mean? Lucas leaned back in his chair. It means Ethan is usually certain about everything. Nobody is certain about everything. He is close. The answer came far too quickly. For a moment, I did not know what to say. Lucas studied me carefully. The interesting part is that he clearly does not know what to do about you. Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Both of us looked up. Ethan had arrived. The timing felt almost suspicious. His eyes moved immediately toward our table, then toward the second coffee cup, then toward Lucas. The expression that crossed his face lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I did not. Neither did Lucas. In fact, Lucas looked delighted. Speak of the devil, he murmured. Ethan approached. Calm, collected, perfectly controlled. Am I interrupting something? Not at all, Lucas said. We were discussing literature. Ethan looked unconvinced. Of course you were. The three of us talked for a while after that. At least Lucas and I did. Ethan remained unusually quiet. Every time Lucas made me laugh, Ethan seemed to focus very carefully on whatever book happened to be nearby. Every time Lucas suggested another coffee, Ethan somehow found a reason to stay longer. It would have been amusing if it were not so strangely fascinating. Eventually Lucas checked his watch and stood. I should leave before someone accuses me of causing trouble. That would be a fair accusation, Ethan said. Lucas ignored him completely. Instead, he looked directly at me. Dinner sometime? The question caught me off guard. Ethan froze. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. Lucas saw it too. The silence that followed felt almost identical to the one on the harbor terrace. Dinner, I repeated. As friends, Lucas said innocently. The word innocent had never sounded less innocent. I glanced toward Ethan. Big mistake. because the look in his eyes made my stomach tighten unexpectedly. Not anger, not approval, something far more complicated, something possessive, something he clearly hated feeling. And in that moment, for the first time, I realized Lucas was not testing me at all. He was testing Ethan. Some people spend years avoiding a truth that becomes obvious to everyone else in a matter of minutes. Ethan Moretti reached that point 3 days after Lucas asked me to dinner. The funny thing was that I never actually went. Not because I did not like Lucas. I genuinely did. He was kind, intelligent, and endlessly entertaining. The problem was that every time I considered accepting, something felt wrong. Or perhaps someone. By Friday evening, I found myself closing the bookstore later than usual. The streets outside were already dark. Most neighboring businesses had turned off their lights. Only a few restaurants remained open along the block. I was locking the front door when a familiar black car pulled up beside the curb. Ethan stepped out. "You know," I said, "most people call before showing up. Most people are smarter than I am." The answer surprised me. Ethan rarely joked about himself. That sounds serious. Unfortunately, it is. Something in his expression immediately caught my attention. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, as though he had spent days arguing with someone difficult. "Do you want coffee?" I asked. "Very much." 10 minutes later, we sat inside the bookstore with 2 steaming cups between us. The building felt different after closing. Quieter. More personal. The shelves seemed to absorb sound. Outside, rain had started falling again, tapping softly against the windows. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Ethan stared into his coffee as though it contained answers. Finally, I broke the silence. "You are thinking too hard." A short laugh escaped him. "That obvious?" Painfully. He shook his head slowly. "Lucas told me the same thing. That is because he enjoys annoying you." "That is true." Another silence followed. Then Ethan surprised me. "Did you go?" I frowned. "Go where?" "Dinner." The single word explained everything. I almost smiled. "No," his eyes lifted immediately. "No." "No," relief flashed across his face so quickly he probably thought I missed it. I did not. "Why?" he asked. The question sounded casual. It was not. Because I was not interested. Ethan looked away first. "I see. Do you?" He seemed ready to answer. Then stopped. Rain continued falling outside. Somewhere down the street, a car horn echoed briefly before fading into the night. "Claire." His voice sounded unusually serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "When Lucas asked you to dinner, what did you think?" I laughed softly. "That is a dangerous question." "Probably." I thought he was being charming. Ethan nodded. "He usually is." And I thought he knew exactly what he was doing. For the first time all evening, a genuine smile appeared. He definitely did. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, something shifted. Ethan looked toward the bookshelves before speaking again. He was testing me. The statement hung in the air between us. "Testing you?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan stared at me for several seconds. Long enough that my pulse began speeding up. Long enough that I suddenly became aware of how close we were sitting. Because he already knew something I was trying very hard not to admit. My breath caught. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it. Ethan noticed too. For a moment, neither of us moved. The bookstore seemed impossibly quiet. Then he laughed softly and rubbed a hand across his jaw. The worst part is that he was right. About what? The question came out barely above a whisper. Ethan looked directly at me. No walls. No distractions. No carefully controlled distance. Just honesty. For the first time since I met him, I saw a man who was completely out of excuses. About the fact that I was jealous. The confession settled over the room like a heartbeat. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. And judging by the look in Ethan Moretti's eyes, admitting it aloud terrified him far more than keeping it hidden ever had. The confession changed something neither of us could pretend not to notice. For several seconds after Ethan admitted he had been jealous, the bookstore remained completely silent. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The coffee between us slowly cooled. Yet neither of us seemed capable of looking away. I had imagined many explanations for his behavior over the past few months. Curiosity, friendship, protectiveness. I had never seriously considered jealousy. Mostly because jealousy implied something neither of us had been willing to name. Ethan finally broke eye contact first. A short laugh escaped him as he shook his head. That sounded less ridiculous in my head. It did. I asked softly. Not really. Despite everything, I smiled. The tension eased slightly. Not enough to disappear. Just enough for both of us to breathe again. Ethan looked around the bookstore. You know what the worst part is? I have a feeling you are going to tell me. I spent weeks convincing myself I was being reasonable. And were you? Absolutely not. The answer came so quickly that I laughed out loud. The sound seemed to surprise both of us. Ethan smiled too. A real one. Warm. Unguarded. The kind he rarely showed anyone. For a moment, he looked younger. Less like a man carrying the weight of an empire and more like someone simply enjoying a conversation. Lucas is never going to let me forget this, he said. Probably not. He has been waiting for years to be right about something. You make him sound competitive. You have no idea. We talked for another hour after that. Not about jealousy. Not directly. Instead, the conversation drifted naturally from one subject to another. Favorite childhood memories. Places we wanted to visit. Mistakes we regretted. The strange thing was that every answer seemed to reveal another piece of the person sitting across from me. I learned that Ethan collected first editions because his grandfather loved books. He learned that I started the bookstore because libraries had once been the only place where I felt understood. Neither of us planned to share those things. Somehow we did anyway. Eventually the rain stopped. Midnight approached. The city outside grew quieter. Ethan stood and helped me close the last few lights in the store. Together we walked toward the front entrance. The darkness outside reflected softly against the glass. Claire. I turned. His voice sounded different again. More serious. There is something you should know. My heart immediately sped up. That sounds ominous. It is not. He hesitated. For a man who usually seemed certain about everything, hesitation looked surprisingly unfamiliar. I have spent most of my life around people who wanted something from me. I listened quietly. Money. Influence. Opportunities. His eyes found mine. You never asked for any of those things. The words landed harder than they should have. Because they were true. I never wanted Ethan's connections. I never cared about his reputation. If anything, those things often complicated matters. I like you because you are Ethan, I said before I could stop myself. Silence followed immediately. My pulse raced. Wonderful. Now I was the one saying reckless things. Ethan stared at me, completely still. The look in his eyes made it impossible to look away. You have no idea what that means to me. His voice was barely above a whisper. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Somewhere outside, a taxi passed through the intersection. The world continued turning. Yet the moment felt suspended in time. Then a phone vibrated. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Perfect timing. I laughed. Important. He checked the screen and sighed. Unfortunately, whatever was happening clearly required his attention. Duty always seemed to find him eventually. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, but did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood there looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not curiosity, not amusement. Something deeper. Something certain. Good night, Claire. Good night, Ethan. He walked out into the cool night air and disappeared toward the waiting car at the curb. I watched until the taillights vanished around the corner. Only then did I lock the door and lean against it. My heart refused to calm down. Because for the first time since Ethan Moretti entered my bookstore, I was no longer wondering whether he cared about me. I was starting to realize how much. Love rarely arrives the way people expect. Sometimes it appears gradually. Sometimes it arrives all at once. And sometimes it reveals itself through a sentence spoken before the heart has time to catch up. 2 weeks after that night in the bookstore, winter arrived in Boston. The city looked different beneath the first light snowfall. Streets softened. Rooftops turned white. Holiday lights reflected across shop windows and quiet sidewalks. Business slowed slightly, giving me more time than usual to think. Which turned out to be a terrible idea. Because every thought seemed to lead back to Ethan. Every conversation, every memory, every moment. By then, neither of us was pretending anymore. We still had not officially defined whatever existed between us. Yet something had changed. The uncertainty was gone. One Saturday evening, the bookstore hosted its annual holiday gathering. Nothing extravagant. Just coffee, pastries, local musicians, and loyal customers who treated the store like a second home. The building felt warm despite the cold outside. Laughter drifted between bookshelves. Children sat near the reading corner, listening to stories. For the first time in years, I found myself genuinely happy. Near 7 o'clock, the front door opened. Ethan walked inside, carrying snow on the shoulders of his dark coat. Several customers immediately greeted him, not because they knew who he was, because they knew he belonged there. The realization made my heart unexpectedly full. He crossed the room and stopped beside me. Busy night. Very. His eyes moved across the bookstore. You built something special here. I smiled. I had help. No. He shook his head gently. You built this. Before I could respond, another familiar voice appeared behind us. I see I am late. Lucas Bennett stepped through the doorway carrying a wrapped gift. You are always late, Ethan replied. It creates anticipation. Lucas handed me the package. For the bookstore. That is very thoughtful. I have my moments. The evening continued peacefully. Music played. Customers came and went. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, the crowd began thinning. Snow continued falling outside the windows. The bookstore felt smaller now. More intimate. More personal. Lucas eventually checked his watch and stood. I should leave before I become sentimental. That would be tragic, Ethan said. Lucas laughed. Then his attention shifted between us. A knowing smile appeared. Before I go, I have one question. I immediately became suspicious. That is never good. Probably not. He looked directly at Ethan. Do you remember the fundraiser? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Unfortunately. Lucas grinned. I thought so. I laughed despite myself. You are never letting that go, are you? Absolutely not. Ethan shook his head. You are impossible. And yet I was right. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that exists when everyone already knows the answer. Lucas smiled one final time before heading toward the door. Good night, Claire. Good night, Lucas. He looked toward Ethan. Try not to overthink everything. Then he disappeared into the snowy night. The bookstore grew quiet. Only a handful of people remained. Ethan and I stood near the front window watching snowflakes drift beneath streetlights. He was right. You know, Ethan said softly. I turned toward him. About what? His eyes met mine. Calm. Certain. Honest. That night at the fundraiser. My heart immediately remembered the harbor terrace. The city lights. The impossible silence that followed. Ethan stepped slightly closer. For weeks afterward, I kept asking myself why I said those words. Neither of us looked away. And I whispered. A faint smile appeared. Warm. Real. Eventually I realized something. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. The world seemed to fade around us. I said you were mine before I understood the truth. My pulse raced. What truth? Ethan's expression softened completely. The walls were gone now. The distance was gone. Only honesty remained. That I was already yours. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there smiling beneath the warm bookstore lights while snow covered the city outside. And in that quiet space between two ordinary heartbeats, I finally understood something beautiful. The strongest people are not changed by power. They are changed by love. And sometimes the person who owns your heart arrives long before you realize you have given it away.